Hello and welcome to the brand new Century Sim Racing podcast. My name is James Whitehouse. I'm joined by my good friend Tony Draper. Say hello, Tony.
Hello, Tony.
Cool. Well, the plan here is to just have chats about general motorsport stuff. We'll talk about Formula One. We'll talk about sim racing. On today's show, we're going to be talking about a few things. I want to talk about George Russell versus Valtteri Bottas and how that went down at Sakhir last weekend. I also want to talk about the brand new BMW rim that Fanatec are bringing out, because I've got a lot of opinions on that. There's a bunch of other stuff that we're going to talk about. So what we're going to do is just chat and see how it all goes. Before we start, I would be remiss if I didn't say, if you're enjoying this, please don't forget to like and subscribe. Every little bit helps. We're growing a community. You can also find us on our Discord, which is in the description below. Cool. So moving swiftly forward then. George Russell. I think we can all agree that the Sakhir Grand Prix was a great advert for Formula One. I don't want to get too deep into the whole see how much better it is when Lewis Hamilton's not there, because of course we missed him and we wanted to get well soon. But hey, what a great advert for George Russell, man.
You know what? It was one of those races that I don't think I've been that emotionally involved in a race in a very long time. Even though it's been an incredible season already, that race in particular it had everything. It had the drama, it had the unknown with George coming in, and of course Jack Aitken and Pietro Fittipaldi coming in. So there was loads of unknowns, and it did not disappoint in any way. What a roller coaster!
Yeah, it was unbelievable. I think that it was. And talking about just the on-track stuff, like George Russell's drive had everything. Like, he had a great start. He showed that he could lead from the front. He managed his tires, but then when he needed to, he battled through the field. I just can't believe that the one time that every Formula One fan in the world wanted Mercedes to actually win was the one time that they messed up the pit stops.
It's unbelievable.
How does that even happen? It's the Netflix curse. You know, Netflix were following.
Yeah, that's right.
Of a weekend.
Yeah, I mean, I'm excited for that episode when it comes out. But you're right. It seems to me like when Mercedes do it wrong, they really do it wrong. They never have a little slip and it's okay. Like if you think back to Germany last year, when they do it wrong, they really, really muck it up. And yeah, you're right. I think it was the whole nation seemed to be behind that one drive that George was pulling out of the bag, and my God, did he ace it?
Yeah.
And he really showed his true colours. And also, I think, a little bit of a harsh statement here, I think, but maybe he showed that Valtteri Bottas really is quite an average driver.
Yeah, I think it's a very difficult one to call on Valtteri Bottas. Like, I should preface this for everyone listening at home, and it's a theme that's going to appear throughout these podcasts. I am a massive Sebastian Vettel fan. I have been for a long time. I was a fan before he was world champion. So I've spent the better part of the whole of the last 2 years saying stuff like, well, it's not as simple as he's just lost it. So I will say for Valtteri Bottas that he looks very clearly like a man who has been completely run down by being Lewis Hamilton's teammate.
That's a fair statement. That's for sure.
You know, he's in a team, just, to draw comparison to Sebastian Vettel again, there's another guy that's in a team that's pushing very hard behind another driver, which means that they're developing the car away from him. They care about him, but it's, they don't care about him quite as much. He's not their golden goose, if you like. So that must be tough, but on the other side, you've got to say that Valtteri Bottas had a wonderful opportunity to be the leader of the team for a change, and he didn't take it at all.
Didn't take it. Although, you could argue that he did what Hamilton would do had Bottas got the better of the starts, which is sit behind, never let the gap get more than about 2 or 3 seconds, bide your time, and hope that the race is going to come back to you towards the end. And had it not been for the colossal muck-up of the team, maybe we'd have seen Bottas come back at him at the end of the race and start pushing on a little bit. As you know, especially on a high-speed circuit like that, it's difficult to follow, and it chews up your tyres. So there seems to be this pattern, even when Bottas gets the better start of the two Mercedes and it's Lewis in the other car, that Lewis will sit behind a few seconds and just let that happen until it feels like the opportune moment to strike. And we didn't really get a chance to see whether that was going to happen. So perhaps I'm being a little unfair on Bottas.
Again, it's a very difficult situation, isn't it? Like, there's no... the only people that know for sure are Mercedes, and they're not going to tell, are they? The other big thing that's been talked about a lot is obviously George Russell showed how good he was, but the amount of... Well, it just goes to show that it's just the car, and Hamilton's not that good, has been unbelievable. Like, the amount of that has been ridiculous.
Yeah, and Chris Harris said it best, which is one weekend does not 7 championships make. Couldn't say it better myself. You know, you can't... You've still got to go out and drive the race. You've still got to beat your teammate soundly, race on race, week in, week out. And even Bottas this week, he was a couple of days ago, was interviewed by Natalie Pinkham, who asked him who the greatest of all time is, and he said Lewis. You know, and that's his teammate who is desperately trying to beat him and assert dominance. So, you know, he's absolutely shown that he is a rising star, to quote Toto, but he's not, you know, we can't say that he's World Championship material just yet. It's too early to say any of that.
Yeah, you're absolutely correct. I think that being a world champion, even just a one-time world champion, is about so much more than just being a fast driver. You know, it's leading a team, it's building the team around you, it's helping the team develop a car, it's the feedback that you give them, it's your mental attitude away from the sport, it's all of it. You know, I mean, Schumacher won 7 titles, and no one imagined that we'd see that matched in our lifetime. So for Hamilton to do it, obviously, you know, he has had the best car, but how many world champions have won without the best car? It's a tiny list, really.
It's a tiny list, and Lewis is on that list with the McLaren. It wasn't the best car that season.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for sure. I mean, you could argue, you look at a guy like Sebastian Vettel. I remember, again, I'm going to be talking about Vettel a lot on this, I can tell.
I'll just go and have a nap. Just call me when you're done.
Well, Christian Horner said it perfectly. You know, at the end of the day, you've got to beat your teammate. You know, and we'll use Hamilton as an example because he's more contemporary. You've got to give it to Nico Rosberg. You know, I don't know that he was, you know, I was never particularly a fan, but he was still good enough to be there to win a title. And he gave Hamilton a good run for his money. Bottas has definitely made Hamilton have to work for it. But at the end of the day, you've got to beat your teammate. You know, and a team like Mercedes, which I think we can all agree is the best team in Formula One right now, arguably in history, maybe. I think that's for a different podcast. But the best team in history isn't going to have one driver who's amazing and a driver who's average. They're going to have 2 of the best drivers because they can get the best drivers. So for Hamilton to have crushed Bottas in the way that he has, that's all part of being the GOAT. You know, That's how you win 7 titles, is you beat your teammate.
I 100% agree. Totally agree. So the next question is then, why was Russell put in the car last weekend when they have a reserve driver in Stoffel Van Dorn?
Because I think that, firstly, they will have wanted someone, bearing in mind it is the best car in the grid, they would have wanted someone that had very, you know, up to date and recent F1 experience. That was within the Mercedes family. He's tested for Mercedes many times, so he's familiar with the setup. It was going to take less for them to get him up to speed with how they operate. Plus, you know, I think that there's a lot of room for the idea that Hamilton hasn't signed a contract yet. He's holding out for more money because that's why contract negotiations last so long. So they put George Russell out. He had an amazing weekend, and they can now go back to Lewis Hamilton and say, you better sign that piece of paper quick, son.
Well, that's what I was going to ask about, because do you think Lewis was sat at home watching that and going, bugger, I've just lost 20 million off my new contract negotiation?
I think he would be foolish not to. I hope that Lewis Hamilton is, and certainly he's saying that he's at that end of his career where he'd relish the challenge. Because what has he got left to prove? You know, if he's going to keep racing for the long term, it's got to be stimulating for him.
Do you think that, or do you think, you know, we always say racing drivers are a selfish breed, right? Mm-hmm. Any time you've got a chance to get one up on anybody else, they'll take it. And do you not think that perhaps Lewis is sat there going, well, I don't want to fight some young gun who's going to take the limelight away from me. I want it all. I want 10 championships. I want to be winning championships until the moment I'm done, and when I'm done, I'm walking away.
Sure. Well, I think the answer to that question is another question. Does Lewis Hamilton believe that he is good enough to beat anybody on any day?
I think he does.
I think he does as well.
Yeah.
So I think that Hamilton doesn't really care who's in the seat next to him as long as there's not going to be friction like there was with Rosberg.
Do you think Russell would bring that friction?
I can't say I've seen anything in George Russell that leads me to believe that he's the kind of guy that will cause any drama.
I kind of disagree with that. He seems to me to be one of these incredibly confident young drivers who comes into a situation and does their very best to make it their own. I mean, even after the last weekend and all of the shock and the drama and the disappointment, you know, he came out and very publicly said, I hope I've given Toto a headache for 2022, if not sooner. That's not something you say if you are not okay to ruffle a few feathers.
Sure, yeah. But I think you're right. But again, it's a complicated one, isn't it? Because of course George Russell, being the ambitious young guy that he is, wants to be in the best car. And I don't think that he's going to care particularly if he replaces Bottas or if he replaces Hamilton. He just wants in. Because he's had a taste of honey now and he wants the whole beehive, you know?
Absolutely. Do you think... Okay, let me put it another way. If, let's say that Russell signs for Mercedes for 2022, which is a fair gambit, in that situation, what does Bottas do? Do you think he would sign for a lower car, a la Kimi Räikkönen, or would he say, if I can't have the best, I'm off? I'm going rallying.
That is a big question, isn't it? Like, you've heard me say it before about many drivers. You know, I think he's a good driver, but perhaps it's time for him to go and have a glittering career in sports cars.
Yeah, I love it when you say that. But it's so right. It's so right. So do you think that's what he does? He goes to, well, whatever, Formula E or...
I don't know that a Formula One driver who's been at the top is going to willingly go to Formula E. Because I don't know that Formula E is yet at a level that it's technical enough or competitive enough, really.
Massa did.
But Massa did at the very end of his career. Bottas isn't at the end of his career. You know, I think the circumstances are different. You know,
that's a fair call.
Because if you think that Massa had his crash that ended his season in 2009 and was never the same again, and he retired at the end of 2016. Yeah. So I mean, there's a fair amount of time there between him not really being the same since and moving over to Formula E.
Very true. We should mention, shouldn't we, that at the time of recording the podcast, we don't yet know who's driving that first Mercedes this weekend in Abu Dhabi.
Yeah, it's Thursday before Abu Dhabi. It's worth pointing out, though, that Jack Aitken has done the driver's interview for Williams, and George Russell wandered into the paddock this morning wearing Mercedes team gear, so...
He certainly did, but Lewis's name is over the garage gantry, so we still don't really know. As much as, you know, it's Lewis's car, he's earned it, he's the driver with the car, I want to see Russell have another nibble at it.
100%.
I don't think there's anybody 100%. Out there that doesn't.
Yeah, for sure. Shall we move on? I think
we'd probably better had. We could talk about this all day, couldn't we?
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so the next topic on the agenda then is Fanatec have just announced that in partnership with BMW, they have they are releasing a new rim that will fit onto their Podium Series wheelbases. Now, the interesting thing about this rim, and the reason that I want to talk about it, is that it's been designed in conjunction with BMW, and for the first time we have a sim racing wheel that we can all buy that will fit without any need for adjustments or anything like that. Will fit into the 2022 BMW M4 GT3, which will be racing in real life. Now, the question is, why? I just don't see why that's necessary. Because if you think about it, right, how many racing drivers do you know that race at the level of GT3 who finish a race weekend and take their steering wheel home?
Yeah, you make a valid point. It's not going to be a mass market appeal, is it? But I suppose it's going to hinge on how much it's going to cost. I mean, a lot of people at the higher end of the sim racing world are already using SimuCube and all of these kinds of manufacturers that are really top end stuff, and their stuff, you can't buy very much by them that you get change out of £1,000. You're north of that, and this wheel is obviously going to be that, as you say, full carbon. You take it out your sim and put it in your GT3 car and go racing. It's not going to be cheap for sure, but it rolls off the same production line as the wheels that they're using in the race car. And so all of the R&D was already done. So does it need to be as expensive as we expect it's going to be?
I guess technically no. Does any of this stuff need to be as expensive as it is? But the fact is that I think that knowing Fanatec as a company, they're going to have taken this opportunity for a huge marketing thing. We're the first people to do this thing. And because they're the only ones doing that sort of thing, they'll feel that they can put a premium on it. Especially because they don't have a wheel that's upwards of £1,000. Cube Controls is a great example. If you look at all of their stuff, I think the cheapest thing that they make is like €600.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Now, I don't see what you're getting for the extra money.
Yeah.
Correct me if I'm wrong. Do you know what I mean? It's to a certain extent, the thing that would make me go for one wheel versus another is things like button position and how comfortable is it in my hands.
Mm.
Those are kind of the important factors. Why do I need one that's going to fit an actual racing car?
Very true. And actually, to a certain extent, when I was reading about this, that we were talking about the idea that actually it's not even going to fit on a bunch of the even the mid-range Fanatec wheelbases. It's only going to fit the DD1 and DD2 direct drive wheelbases. And so what's you're already saying effectively this is only for the top level users. And I guess it'll be priced accordingly. Perhaps you're right. It's all about the, hey, look, we're first. And to a certain extent, it doesn't matter if we don't sell that many. They're being made anyway. So does it particularly matter? Isn't it cool, though?
Yeah, I've got to say, I don't like how it looks at all.
But it is function over form, though, surely? If it's being used in the race car, it's because it feels right. You get good feedback through it, and the buttons are in a usable place. It certainly looks to me. I use the Fanatec BMW GT2 rim, as you know, which is very much an entry-level rim in the Fanatec world. The button layout is a nightmare. I find it really, really difficult to find where the buttons are, especially since I use VR. And I just can't find the buttons, whereas this looks incredibly easy to find where stuff is. But then, of course, for me, all of that extra money that goes into backlit LEDs and buttons and whatever is a complete waste of money from my perspective.
Yeah, 100%. Well, I should say I'm a VR user as well, so I completely agree with that. If we're talking about function, looking at it as just a functional thing, though, like if you compare it to the Formula V2 rim that Fanatec makes, that's kind of their flagship Formula rim. That's got all the rotary dials and it's got all the sort of the rotary things under your thumbs and all the buttons and whatever, and it's all easy to reach and everything. The other thing as well is that certainly the Fanatec wheels that we use at Century Sim, they have motors in the wheel, in the steering wheel, right, which gives you a little bit more force feedback and whatever. Is that going to be available in the BMW rim? Because they don't need that in the race car.
That's a very valid point, isn't it? They're not the same environment. And so just because it comes out of the race car doesn't mean it's going to be the be-all and end-all for sim racing. That's a really good point.
That's it. The demands are completely different. Because if you think as well, like if I'm the head designer at BMW, getting ready for my race weekend, and I'm going, okay, so you're telling me that this steering wheel has motors on board to give vibration, to give more feedback. That's just adding weight. Like, I don't need that. Get rid of it. So I will be very interested to see whether or not, when the race teams actually get hold of them, whether or not they are exactly stock. Because, it would surprise me, because they're going to have, racing drivers are going to have specific demands for where they want the buttons and all that kind of stuff. Like coming back to George Russell, that was an issue that he had. over the Grand Prix weekend because he didn't know what any of the buttons did because it was Lewis Hamilton's steering wheel.
Yeah, he said he pressed the neutral button during qualifying a couple of times, didn't he?
Yeah.
Can you imagine? But here's a question for you then. If it's ugly, which is very subjective, I'm definitely not an arbiter of taste, but I kind of agree with you. It's not the prettiest looking thing in the world. Now, if you're climbing into a BMW GT3 car, the last thing on your mind is going to be how pretty is the steering wheel. But if you're climbing into your sim cockpit, there is an element of that, isn't there? How does it make you feel when you sit in front of this thing, which is effectively static?
Yeah.
Does it? I mean, I don't know. I'm looking at the V2 Formula Fanatec rim, which is all of £350 or 360 euros, and I think it looks great. And it's got a nice screen on it, nice LEDs. It's a really nice looking thing. And then I look at the BMW thing, and it almost looks kind of cheap by comparison. I'm sure if you've got the two in your hands, it wouldn't feel that way. But
yeah,
there's an aesthetic question here as well, isn't there? Is this actually what people want to put on their sim rigs just because it happens to come from the car?
Well, that's it. You know, the demands, I think we've already touched on this, that the demands of a sim racer and the demands of an actual racing driver are completely different. You know, it's a different environment. I mean, you and I are both avid sim racers, aren't we? Mm-hmm. So, and I think you can agree that when I get into the sim, what I want to do is feel like a racing driver.
Absolutely.
You know, so I'm simulating that bit just as much as the actual driving. So I just don't know that spending however much money it's going to be, and to be fair, we don't know how much it's going to cost. We don't know whether I just can't see how spending X amount of money on something that would go into an actual racing car, had I had access to that, is going to make me feel more like a racing driver.
Yeah.
Especially because I'm in VR and I can't see it.
That's it. That's the other thing. You know, how much better can it possibly feel than any of the rims that we already use? Especially if you're not looking at it.
That's it. I suppose time will tell. I'd be interested for people's feedback on this. What do you think? Let us know in the comments if you've got a particular opinion. Do you think it looks nice? Would you have one? How much would you be willing to pay for it? Let us know.
If Fanatec do want to send us one to test, we'll of course put a thorough test to it.
Yeah, I am going to need 8 though, because I have 8 simulators.
That's right. We'll need 9 obviously. So I can take one home as well. That's quite important. I'll happily put it through its paces.
Absolutely. Cool. Okay, moving on then. Let's talk about the new iRacing single-seater that they've just brought out. Now, for those of you that aren't aware of this, back in May, iRacing went to a partner of theirs, Dallara, who, for those of you that are not aware of Dallara, they're a race car manufacturer. They make all the chassis for like Formula 2, Formula 3. They do all of the Indy cars. They do a load of like LMP2 cars in World Endurance and IMSA and all of those. They also do a lot of the chassis work for Haas F1. So they're a big deal, you know. And for the iRacing users out there, you'll be very familiar with their stuff because in terms of iRacing content, you can get the F3 car, you can get the P217 LMP2, Indy cars, etc. So back in May, iRacing went to Dallara and said, we feel like we have this hole in our content. What we would like is for you to design a theoretical racing car. You know, design it as if you're going to build it, and then do all the data, wind tunnel testing, blah, 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 and then we will put it into iRacing. So it came out yesterday. I bought it straight away. I did a race in it. The race didn't go well, but I actually got hit by Robert Wickens, who used to race in IndyCar. I think Tony was watching at the time. He may disagree on that, but we'll...
Racing incident, I'll say.
Yeah, we'll call it a racing incident. We'll call it... Yeah, I was ahead. Anyway, thank you. So
I'm actually on your side of this. I think he...
yes!
I think he understeered completely clear of the apex and took you out, personally.
Yeah,
that's what
for sure. Thank you very much. Anyway, so Robert Wickens, if you're listening, I'm ready for round 2 when you are. But I was ahead. So I spent, all told, a couple of hours driving the car, and I must say, I really liked it. I liked it an awful lot. Like, they kind of... it's an interesting thing that they've done, because obviously it's not a real racing car, and that's a departure for iRacing. So I'll have a question for you and to get your opinion on that in a second. But just to talk a bit more about the car, firstly, they wanted something that was going to be really fun to race, which meant that it had to be able to follow each other quite closely. It's epically powerful. It's got a 900 horsepower screaming V10 in the back, without naturally aspirated and everything, so it sounds breathtaking. It's got loads of aero, big fat tires, and I think it looks fantastic. Now, the question is, as an iRacing user, bearing in mind that this isn't a real car that we can watch on TV, is that what we want?
I'm torn on this completely, and I don't fall naturally one way or the other with it. I haven't driven it yet. The only experience I've had with it is watching you getting hit by Robert Wickens at Spa last night. It looks like it's a hoot to drive. It looks to me like it's almost Dallara saying, we wish this was what F1 actually was. Naturally aspirated V10, 3 litre, 600 kilos, can follow similar lap times to current Formula One. You know, only the top tier guys are doing only a second off Hamilton's pole time from Spa this year. You know, and so from that perspective, it looks like an immense car to drive, especially since in iRacing, the Formula One car that's in there is incredibly, it's a formidable machine to try and tame, and it's because of that the racing hasn't necessarily been traditionally very good. It's not very populated.
Yeah,
so
well, that's it. I sorry to interrupt, but iRacing has had this problem for a while. I think that there are actually 2 Formula One cars, neither of which are particularly drivable, and it's kind of been a bit of a dead series. Because firstly, you have to have an A license to drive the Formula One Grand Prix series, and the McLaren. I can't remember which particular model it is. It's the terrible Honda one that Alonso and Button drove. Is obviously it's all got all the hybrid boosts and stuff and blah 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 blah. So having a car that's that fast and loud and nice to drive without all of that extra gubbins is really great. I must say, like running a sim racing center where the general public come to race. We're not a high performance center. Like, we've had professional racing drivers come here to turn some laps and whatever, but for the most part, it's for people to come and have a go. And whenever they come in and say, I want to drive a Formula One car, I always say to them, look, I have modern Formula One cars, you can drive them, but they're actually not very fun because you're having to charge the battery and you only get one hot lap at a time. And if you want to go fast, that's how it's got to be, and blah, blah, blah. So what I'll do is I'll put you in the Ferrari F2004, which, to draw comparisons, is a car with shed loads of downforce. It's got a screaming V10 naturally aspirated engine in the back that does about 1,000 brake horsepower, and all you got to do is get in and drive it really fast. And that on that level, it's a much more blunt force instrument.
And traction control.
Yeah. I should say that the Dallara IR01 does not have traction control. But to be honest, I don't feel like it really needs it. It's got a throttle shaping thing that you can change in the car, which I found really interesting. As standard, it's on 1. This is a good tip that I found last night. As standard, it's set to 1, which is a sort of very S-shaped curve to the throttle input. But I did a little bit of reading, and I put mine on 3, which made it completely linear, which made riding the throttle mid-corner much easier. And I found that the car wasn't spitting me out on corner exit, which I really appreciated.
Yeah, I bet. Why would you ever want a throttle map that wasn't linear, do you think?
I don't know. I think that's going to be a question for a professional racing driver. I'm gonna try and down the line, once we've got some numbers, see if we can get Ollie Webb on the show, because he's the racing driver that I have access to, and I suspect he's going to know the answer to that. But for now, I don't know. If you do know the answer, please let us know in the comments, and we will read out your answer in the next show.
Yeah, I'd be really interested to know that. Are there any other gubbins to it? Because I having not driven it yet, I don't know whether I know there's, obviously the different compounds of tyres available.
That was an interesting thing that I didn't realize was a thing until I started looking through the setup options. Like, I should say that I am not particularly well versed in setting up a race car. Like, I've got a couple of bits of knowledge about iRacing specifically that I've learned that help. But I'll tell you what's an interesting thing that it doesn't have. It doesn't have any facility to change the wing angles.
So it's fixed aero.
Fixed aero, yeah. which I thought was really interesting. Like, why have they done that?
That is really interesting.
I suppose I should say about this car as well is that the series that it's going to be running in iRacing is a C-Class series. Because I guess, with the Grand Prix series and the McLaren being an A-Class thing, there's not a lot of people that obviously minimizes the amount of people that can race it. And then you've got to hope that smaller group of people are interested in driving it. So it's kind of a bit quiet. And it only really gets used in league racing as far as I understand. But I think the idea with this was that it was going to be a much more general populist type thing to drive. So I guess making it easier to set up, and honestly dealing with aero it's a bit of for me personally, a bit of a mystic art.
Absolutely. The same for me. It's almost counterintuitive. To a certain extent, you think, I'm not turning in well enough, and so I'll crank on some more front wing, and all of a sudden it just doesn't work that way. You've got to set up the rest of the car around the aero setup, and it's such a deep topic. One thing we have actually skirted around though here is it's not a real car.
Yeah.
Does it matter?
Yeah. But that again comes back to the original question, and exactly why I wanted to talk about this. Is that what you want from iRacing?
I mean, Assetto Corsa is obviously, that's what you run at Century Sim Racing. It's what we first kind of really got into league racing participating in. And Assetto Corsa has kind of been very inclusive of the kind of modification community and bringing people in, and you can go lawnmower racing, you can have a 3,000 horsepower Mini, you can do whatever you like, and that's really fun. But iRacing is the ultimate driving simulator, right? Not the tagline, obviously. But that's the idea, isn't it? Is that it's as close as you can get to driving race cars and racing race cars against other people until you start spending silly money and actually going and doing it. So is there a place for that? I'm a little bit torn about this, because if it's really great and it encourages great racing, that's what we're all here for, right? If the racing is really good, then to a certain extent I kind of don't care. But it does make you wonder, why isn't the racing good in the real Formula One cars that are on there? And is this taking the platform in a different direction?
Yeah. Well, that's it. I think that there's two sides to this story. Is it do we want it to be something that's a bit more pure, and are we treating it like it's a driving simulation, or are we doing it because of the racing that it offers? Because those are two sides to a very heavy coin, I think. Because it's certainly in my experience, iRacing is by far and away the best option for finding competitive racing.
Totally agree. Couldn't agree more on that front. And I guess to a certain extent, if you are more of the purist who says, well, it doesn't exist, this is nonsense, I'm not going to drive this, well then don't. There's no obligation for you to. You can still drive your MX-5s and your BMWs and your Audis and whatever. But it's an extra string to the bow, isn't it, for iRacing?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that I'm leaning towards it being a good thing, personally, because it arguably makes it more inclusive, perhaps. I like that it's a C license event. I'll be curious to see how it goes first season, because it's so far my experience of racing at wheel to wheel is it's going to take some getting used to, because it's by far and away the fastest thing that I've driven in iRacing, seriously. Like even the 919 hybrid, I've only done a couple of races in that, but yeah, it's fast, man. Like everything happens in the blink of an eye. Like it's,
Yeah, it looks incredibly fast. It looks difficult to be consistent with, because the margins of error at those kinds of speeds are so small.
I should say that I think that the race that I streamed last night is perhaps not the best advert for how consistent it's possible to be, because in the couple of hours of practice that I did, I was just pounding around, hitting my marks every lap, no problem at all. And I thought that's why I felt confident to go, I'm ready to race this car now, because I was pretty quickly in a rhythm with it. All the practice sessions I was doing, I was in the top 10, which felt great off the bat. I'm struggling to think of it as a bad thing. I don't think it's a bad thing, so long as it produces good racing. I'm kind of all for it, really. Yeah, Me too. Me too. Let us know what you think. Drop us a comment below. Send us a message. Join our Discord. The link is in the description below. Okay, one more thing before we go. It's just occurred to me. I was questioning whether or not I wanted to talk about this, but I'm going to make a super bold prediction, and you can all let me know if you think I'm right or not. Now, there's been a lot of talk about Alexander Albon losing his seat at Red Bull next season, which, in my opinion, I think it's probably best that he does. Obviously, there's a broader conversation to be had here about a team pushing in the favor of another driver, etc. But let's, for the sake of this conversation, assume that he is going to lose his drive, and then the conversation becomes who's going to get it. Now, everyone obviously is talking about Sergio Perez, which I think would be cool. He, without a doubt, deserves a seat in Formula One. There's a lot of talk about the potential of Nico Hülkenberg. I think that would also be cool, but here is my prediction. Alongside Max Verstappen next season will be Sebastian Buemi. And I'll tell you why I think that.
Please do.
Sebastian Buemi, obviously, multiple world endurance champion. He's won Le Mans a bunch of times. He's got F1 experience. He's part of he's been part of the Red Bull driver program, and we know that Red Bull massively favor bringing in someone that's been part of their system. Look at Brendan Hartley. He also is doing the young driver test next week. He's not a young driver. He's a man with Formula One experience, just as Fernando Alonso is. Now, I ask the question, why would Red Bull be putting Sebastian Buemi in their young driver test if they didn't have any plans for him?
It's a really good question. It's kind of, I wouldn't say flown under the radar, but it's not been talked about very much, it seems to me, the fact that he is present and taking place in this test.
Yeah.
And yeah, why do that if he's not going to play some sort of role in your program moving forward? On the question of whether Alex Albon deserves to stay or not, I think we saw him do really well the moment he was promoted. At the race at Spa, he really acquitted himself well, and we all thought, here we go, this is going to be a fight to the death between him and Max, and it just hasn't been that way. And of course, that raises the questions of, is that second seat at Red Bull, is it, the most pressured seat in Formula One? Is it, as Daniel Ricciardo found, that there's really not space for another strong driver there, and the development goes Max's way as the kind of wunderkind of that team? I don't know, but I would love to see Perez there. I think it's criminal that a man with his pedigree, with his ability, as we saw last weekend, okay, slightly unusual circumstances, but you still got to go out and drive it, and he did, and he won the race by a significant margin by the end, considering the gap to the safety car. It would be criminal if he didn't have a seat, especially since he's done everything he needs to in the commercial side of things as well. He doesn't come with no money, but he is, to a certain extent, an elder statesman of Formula One at this stage. But then Sebastian Buemi's hardly a spring chicken anymore. 32, I think he is. Was he a glimmering star when he was last in Formula One?
Well, he had a good go. And to be honest, he was in Formula One quite a long time ago, so I can't really remember that much of him. I think he was in the car at the same time as Jaime Alguersuari and then Jean-Eric Vergne, maybe?
Certainly Alguersuari. I can't remember about Vergne. But I think he did 3 years, I think, that's right, with Toro Rosso, 2009 to 2011.
Yeah.
And he was best rookie in 2009, finishing 16th. 16th again in 2010, and ahead of Alguersuari. So he certainly, by the only metric we can really measure him by, he smashed his teammate.
Yeah, absolutely.
Or eked in front of his teammate is probably more accurate.
Oh, I think if we look at his career since Formula One as well, Formula E champion, of course, multiple Le Mans winner, as I've said, multiple world endurance champion. I don't know. I think it would be an interesting choice. I think that it wouldn't be out of left field for Red Bull to do that either. So we'll see.
Yeah. I'm excited to see what they do. Yeah, you're right. We can leave it there, but yeah, I think it would be crowding the plate somewhat when there are so many great choices already available. To bring in another one that's not really kind of on the radar would be unusual.
Do they put Yuki Tsunoda straight into that seat?
Yes, bang him in.
Yes,
Yeah.
let's have it.
That's what I want to see.
He's only just got the license points as well. Cool. All right. Well, you heard it here first. Sebastian Buemi at Red Bull next season.
Confirmed.
Cool. Thank you very much, everybody. Don't forget to like and subscribe. If you've got any thoughts, any feelings, if you just want to say hello, please drop us a comment below. Come and join us on Discord. The link is in the description below. Tony Draper, thank you very much for joining me, pal. It's been a pleasure.
It absolutely has been a pleasure. I'll see you next time.
Cool. Excellent. Well, this is the Century Sim Racing Podcast. My name is James Whitehouse, and have a great weekend. Thank you very much.